Okay, it's an honor to be with you guys here today. I'll try to cover a bunch of stuff kind of quickly, and then we can get to Q&A, which a lot of times I think is the most thought-provoking for everyone. First, I will say that that the DaVita Village has welcomed 20 of your peers from the prior 5-6 years into our ranks, which is slightly ahead of my business school alma mater, Harvard, but I think we have about 16 or so. And so we're infused with the wonderful talent and training that this place gives you. What I decided when I came to this company in 1999 was that for this next phase of my life, I wanted to really test the notion that companies can be a formidable force for good in the world, while not sacrificing or ignoring their capitalistic responsibilities or fiduciary responsibilities to their shareholders. So that was the basic premise. I think you guys may not face this, but my generation, I'm 55. I don't know how much younger Garth might be than me, or others that you come speak, that in our generation of business schools, that implicit, it was so pervasive a philosophy that it was implicit as opposed to explicit, was kind of what I call the Adam Smith notion of capitalism, which is that if you run a company or you're an executive in a company, your job is to maximize profit within certain ethical boundaries. That's your job, and if you do that, then sort of the invisible hand ends up having that work out pretty well for society, and that was sort of the role definition. And then I think many in your generation have the more enlightened view that, in fact, the notion of defining business leadership is sort of amoral, where it's about not breaking the law and behaving ethically, but not with a broader moral conscience is in fact philosophically wrong and unsustainable. And that instead of looking at decisions like where you should place a factory or what you should pay the people that work for you, or what that environment should feel like to folks, instead of looking at that as sort of an amoral business decision, that in fact those are highly moral decisions. And that companies have this incredible infrastructure administratively and culturally in terms of communication and understanding of each other, that corporations can mobilize and do more good in the community while trying to hit their earnings per share targets in a month than most not-for-profits can do in 2 years. And to somehow have society not benefit from some sort of conscious intellectual and energetic mobilization of that is a crime. So with that notion, we launched our little DaVita adventure. We do call ourselves a village. We say we're a community first and a company second, a community that just happens to be organized in the form of a company. This does not mean we don't care about profit. In fact, our stocks moved from about $1.50 to $74 over the last 11 years. So we're in the top 1% of S&P 500 companies over that period. So we have a lot of regard for our fiduciary responsibilities. But that's the means, not the end. Is the basic notion. So just as if you're the mayor of Denver, where we are headquartered, you care about jobs, right? But you don't care about jobs in and of themselves. You care about jobs because that leads to a healthy economy, which leads to good schools and good parks and good roads and the ability to stay competitive in an intense world. So jobs are the means, not the end. Similarly, what we say is that profits are fine if you look at them like tax to the government, right? It's okay to pay taxes to the government if the government is providing competent services, transparency, fairness, things like that. Then taxes are okay. People get that. Society has to work. Similarly, profits to shareholders are okay as long as they're associated with fairness, transparency, a fair deal, things like that. So I'm going to pull away from all that for a moment and throw out 10 thoughts on leadership that we have taken to heart over the years as we try to infuse every aspect of what we do in the DaVita Village with this notion that we can be a force for good. First of all, in the lives of our teammates or citizens. Now we'll hit 40,000, I think Tuesday of next week, we'll hit our 40,000th teammate or citizen. Be a force for good in their lives first, and then second in our communities in the broader world. And so these are 10 thoughts that we've taken away, and then we can kick whatever around you'd like to. Some of these, again, I'm sensitive to in this setting because you're such a thoughtful group and such a thoughtful institution that some of them are probably far more thought-provoking when I'm talking to a room filled with 55-year-old CEOs than they might be for you, but we'll play that out. Thought number one is a phrase perhaps some of you have heard it. This is not a dress rehearsal, this is your life. I got a lot of my friends who are, just my daughter's here. I didn't know this. I said, I know that. I know that, but so now I have to tell the truth. This is not a dress rehearsal, this is your life. And I got a lot of friends who are 55, successful, wealthy, and not very fulfilled. and they're in a really tough spot as to figure out how to spend the balance of their life. I got a lot of folks like that, and what it tends to be is that they've kind of lost track of what their life was and whose life it was and what their real goals were, which leads me to thought number 2, and it's from a very, very famous, esteemed philosopher called John Cougar Mellencamp. And he said, the most important thing in life is to figure out the most important things in your life. Now, say this to a group of executives, you get a lot of people saying, what a dumb, self-evident thing to say. Because I know what's most important in my life. So I love this when I get to do it with smaller groups. I say, well, write it down for me, would you? I mean, I know it's dumb and self-evident, but write it down in enough specificity so someone could sort of evaluate it. And first of all, people have a lot harder time writing it down than they thought, with any sort of reasonable specificity beyond just saying family and whatever, and very curt phrases. And then I say, okay, now I just like to spend a little bit of time going over your last couple of years, where you spent your money, where you spent your time, where you spent your emotional energy. What are sort of the tail effects of all those things that you've done the last couple of years? And I just want to compare all those allocations and those decisions and that energy to what you said was most important. And what you find is a non-trivial percentage, the 42 to 58-year-olds in the room don't feel very good about that match. And it's just been a long time since they forced themselves to do it with written rigor versus just when they're toasting someone at a wedding or maybe stopping at a stoplight or something. And how ridiculous is it not to bring the same sort of analytical, intellectual, and written rigor to reviewing what's most important in your life and how your actions and decisions map with that, that you don't bring that kind of rigor to it that you do to all sorts of other decisions in your life. It doesn't make much sense in our minds. So we try to bring rigor to that. The third is, just as beauty is in the eye of the beholder, leadership is in the eyes of the led. It does not matter one bit, not one bit, what kind of leader you think you are. You are the type of leader other people experience you to be, period. That is the type of leader you are. You can believe that people misunderstand you. That's fine. But you are the leader other people experience you to be. And until you get to the point where you can sit in front of a group of people and say what they think your weaknesses are, what your behavioral deficiencies are, what your values are, where you can say out loud what they are thinking and what they say to their friend when they're having a beer with them about you, in the same words that they use, until you get to that point where you can talk about it with that kind of knowledge, openness, and personal comfort, then you're not ready to be a full leader. I'll tell to my daughter's story, and I wonder if you even remember this, Chrissy. So what I've done periodically is I get a 360 every year at my request. So an outside consultant comes in and talks to everybody who works closely with me about my performance and my behaviors. And it includes getting an explicit score on each of our core values with comments. And I can't change the score. It goes to the board of directors, and it's shared with the top 3,000 people in our village. So if I'm not walking the talk, I'm held publicly to account. And periodically, I've taken my 360 home. I just actually distributed my most recent one to my kids and to my wife and to my mother about a week and a half ago. But I've done this periodically over the last 12 years. And you may not remember this, Chrissy. When she was about 12, 13, I brought it home. And she read it with the capacity that she could at that age. And she came to dinner. I said, Chrissy, what'd you think? And she goes, well, Daddy, you tell me that if you try your hardest, that's what really counts. That's what you tell me. But the people say that when they try their hardest but disappoint you, a lot of times you get angry with them and you make them feel bad. Now, how do I don't know where she went with that. I sat there, like not knowing what to say to my daughter, looking at me with her beautiful little eyes. And like I said, well, Chrissy, Daddy just hasn't grown up enough yet in that way. And she's just puzzled, because she's, well, you're certainly old enough. You're supposed to be grown up by now. And I understand you're CEO, and why in the hell would they pick someone not grown up to be CEO and supposedly successful? According to my vague sense is that you at least regard yourself as successful, and so it was good. But what also it led to in that particular case is for a while, not that long, but for a while, it was actually easier to discuss her report card because she knew Daddy didn't get all A's. And so it was okay to start to talk more openly about some of that stuff. But anyway, to know what people are thinking about you and how they experience you as a leader is one of the first tests of whether or not, in fact, you are a leader as opposed to just a manager. Fourth miscellaneous thought is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. This one, lots of Stanford and Harvard MBAs need to hear. It's when we bring in our fresh crew every year and they say, what's your single most important piece of advice? This is almost in my top 1 or 2. Because what tends to happen with you people, you're so smart, you're so talented, you have a lot of ambition, and you get out there and you're very intent on proving very quickly so that everyone knows just how capable of adding value you are. Your formidable arsenal of intellectual and management skills and all that, you want to unleash it so that people know. When in fact, most of the people that are working with you or for you know very quickly that you have that arsenal, and that's not what they're wondering about. They're wondering if you care about them. They're wondering if you respect them. They're wondering if you're a true team player or a fake team player. That's what they're wondering. That's the question in their brain, not how smart you are. They already know enough about you just because you went here, and then you eliminate any doubts about you having been an admission mistake in the first 2 months of the job. That's not the question. But so often, that's what folks like you are trying to prove in that first bit of time. Thought number 5, management is a business skill. If you want to learn more about management, go to business school, study management, study business. Leadership is a human skill. You want to learn more about leadership, learn more about human beings, starting with yourself. And a lot of people write books about leadership, and they say, here's the techniques, here's the practices, here's what leaders do. And much more about leadership is about who you are, not what you do. Who you are, what your intentions are, et cetera, can mean that widely varied sets of practices, techniques, et cetera, can be deemed totally acceptable, motivational, useful, helpful, inspirational to folks who work with you. It's much more about who you are as a human. Of course, it doesn't suspend the need for certain native skills. Number 6 of 10, leadership is not a function of position. Leadership is a function of behavior. So do not fall into the trap of, well, I can't really be a leader until they promote me to vice president. I can't really be a leader until I become partner. Once I'm COO, once I run sales, then I can lead. Right now, I'm living in a world that's fettered by all the imperfections of the people I work for and the people they work for. And yeah, those are real constraints that affect what you can do, but they don't affect whether or not you lead. What do leaders do? I say this, and at first it sounds, again, so dumb and self-evident. Leaders lead. That means it's not situational. You don't wait for the right time. You don't wait for the right title. Leading is a way of life. It's not a temporary tactic. It's not a tool. It's not a practice. So leadership is a function of how you behave. There are constraints on the impact you can have. No one is suggesting you commit career suicide. But leaders don't wait for the right time. That's not a leadership ability. It's a political preference. Leaders lead, and it's not based on position. Miscellaneous thought number 7. You may have picked up on this, but not reflected on it directly. Have you ever noticed that no one washes a rental car? It's very, very rare because they don't own it. And what so many leaders don't know is whether you have 10 people working for you or with you or 40,000, how well do you know to what extent they co-own the car? To what extent is it just a job where they put in a reasonable day's work for a reasonable day's pay, more or less in both cases, or is it something more than that? Is there some element of implied social contract or explicit social contract? Do they, in fact, care about the health of the organization, both in terms of how people behave and the business success or not? Is it a much more transactional, utilitarian, mutually, morally barren, emotionally sterile relationship? So how well do you know if the people actually do co-own the car that you're driving? A lot of people have no real clue. And without calling the question, without asking the question, without letting the people speak about their degree of ownership or lack thereof, you are never going to get to the point where you have it. Just like with your own behavioral deficiencies, if you don't get to the point where your people are talking about whether or not the organization lives its core values, where the people talk about their sense of philosophical, emotional, spiritual, team ownership or not, where they are talking out loud with honesty, positively or negatively, then you are not on the path to creating an organization that adds distinctive, sustainable value added to people's life outside of the paycheck. Outside of the paycheck. We believe so much that if we help people grow, if we help people feel more fulfilled at work, they will be better mommies, daddies, siblings, kids, citizens of their community, citizens of the world. But if we drain them of energy with how we work with them, if that relationship is excessively utilitarian, then their ability to give to the world and give to their family is dramatically reduced by what we've done. Miscellaneous thought number 9. That goes 9 to 12. That's a community produces most what it honors most. And this one's very important. At DaVita, we reward business accomplishment. We give big equity awards, we give big bonuses. So we love those people who put a lot of capitalistic points on the board, and we reward them. But we don't honor that behavior. We honor human behavior. So we do things like with core value awards throughout the organization, but I'll just give an example. At the senior level, every January, I'll send out a message to the top 140 leaders and say, okay, it's time for the annual core value nominating process. So we take it very seriously. This year we got about 87 nominations, and that's vice presidents above nominating other people. We often share the nominations. So if Tammy writes one for Fred, I might send it out to everybody so everyone sees that Fred got nominated for the core value of integrity or the core value of team with examples. So Fred's honored even if he didn't win. Tammy's honored because her thoughtful nomination is seen by the rest of the people. Say, whoa, Tammy took the time to write that in a very thoughtful way, very substantive way. We do that for about 8 weeks. We'll be halfway through a dinner, and I'll stop the business discussion, hand out a sheet that has 140 names and our 7 core values, and say, okay, the rest of the dinner's all about nominating. You can nominate someone at the dinner, you can nominate someone not at the dinner, but let's talk about it. It always amazes me if you talk to a CEO and you go, okay, revenue. Is revenue important? And the CEO looks at me like I'm brain dead and says, yeah, revenue is important, KT. And I say, okay, and do you have meetings and reports? And they go, yeah, these are really stupid questions. Of course, we have meetings, reports, and brainstorming sessions about how to protect revenue and grow. Okay, good, I got it. It's important. So you have meetings and process and creativity and brainstorming. So how about expenses? Same thing. Yeah, this is, all right. Now, how about your core values? So I said, no, what kind of meetings do you have talking about that? What kind of metrics do you have? What kind of initiatives do you have to improve people's individual and collective behaviors versus the core values? Well, that's more intangible. We don't kind of do that. He's a little uncomfortable talking about. And we say, my gosh, that'd be as dumb as saying I don't have to tell my wife and kids I love them because it's assumed. That's actually not a good idea. Not a good idea. Certain things need to be talked about, especially because in day-to-day life in a business, especially if your boss is a jerk, it's hard to live the core values because the pressures, budgets, and aging parents and other things push those aspirational day-to-day behaviors out. There's a wonderful Buddhist saying, spiritual practice is what you're doing right now. Right, so it's not about a speech. It's not about every now and then a momentous decision. That particularly as a leader, particularly as an organizational leader, spiritual practice is how you behave every little minute of every day and what kind of impact you're having on the other human beings. And if you don't talk about it, as a group, we have a thing where every single executive who gets an annual professional development review from me, the second section evaluates them on each of our core values in writing. In writing. And so you have those moments where I say, hey, John, other people experience you as very average in integrity. Or this is how they experience you from a team point of view, or accountability, or continuous improvement. These are our core values. In writing, because how can you possibly simultaneously hold the notion that, yeah, we take our core values seriously, but we never talk about them and we never comment on how individuals' behaviors conform to that, in a world where there's all sorts of pressures that can force you into a real, ordinary, average, regression to the mean kind of behavior, which in fact is what a lot of big companies are. And we always say to people, our core values, we're the only Fortune 400 company where the people chose the name of the company, the people chose the logo, the people chose the core values, all by election. Let me go on to number 10. And that is that intentionality rules. Intentionality rules, that people can smell your intentionality and whether or not that your relationship with them is basically a means for advancing your career or your relationship with them is to some extent an end in itself. This is not about charisma. This is not about being articulate. that in the end, a very high percentage of human beings can smell your human intentionality. And that will dictate whether or not they deem you a leader they're willing to follow or not, whether that's someone who cares about their growth or not. And it's one of the things about leaders is it's a leader's job not to create followers. It's a leader's job to create other leaders when you think about growing an organization. And then maybe I'll do one additional one before stopping. A lot of you are going to go on to pretty intense careers, not-for-profit world, for-profit world, government sector, NGOs, whatever. But there's a Buddhist saying, one cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot give what you do not have. And so unless you have a way, combined with whatever ambition you have, which sometimes is high, combined with the pressures that you'll feel because of the positions you're going to be offered and take, which will be high, combined with that, if you don't have a reasonably intellectually coherent, pragmatic, disciplined sense of what you're going to do to refill your cup, then it's going to be hard for you to do that for others. Well, you got to refill your cup physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and however you define that. If you don't do that, then your ability to help other people keep their cups full will be dramatically limited. You cannot give what you do not have. Others cannot give if you don't help them replenish their cup. And so we define our mission as not just wanting people to do a good job in our dialysis company, but we hope to create an environment, a conversation, and a process, and a lot of things we do in DaVita University so that the teammates that work for us become better mommies and daddies, better cousins, better citizens. That's our objective. When we talk about building leaders at DaVita, it's not about creating business leaders. It's about creating life leaders for whom business competence is a subset of that, but not the thing. So I will stop there and now turn it to questions, comments. No embarrassing stories from Chrissy. You're not a student here. You're not allowed to speak.
So I understood from you that leadership was more about behavior than skill. So I would like to ask you, what do you consider to be your behavioral shortcomings? How did you find out about them? And what are you doing to improve them?
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Actually, I'll take a question from somebody else. For me, it's been quite a journey this last 12 years. And forgetting, I started this, I was 43. And the metaphor I developed in the first couple of years when some of the same negative stuff was popping up in my 360 every year, the metaphor I use, it's like being an alcoholic. That when you're 40 and you still have some of these behavioral deficiencies and you've been a CEO for a while, you got to recognize that it isn't just someone gives you the feedback and you have an epiphany and suddenly you stop acting that way. Just like an alcoholic, for the most part, then I could tell you I just decided to stop and it was easy and now I'm never tempted. And so for me, on part of the questions and a number of these items, I've literally had to give myself a daily score. That if I waited for the next year, I mean, I'd be better for 2 weeks after the 360, and then I'd slowly regress back to my prior behavior pattern. And then it'd be 10 months before my next 360, and then I'd be good for a month and go back. So I literally got to the point where not only did I empower people to sort of raise their hand when I was doing the bad naughties, but second, every night I kept a spreadsheet with a score to try to build my muscle memory, my ability to recognize when I was going down the bad path. So some I've eliminated over the last 7, 8 years, and others I haven't. The one on getting angry with people when they underperform, actually the last 2 360s were the first ones where that was a minor point. Not totally gone, but a fraction of what it was before. But it took me eight years of having it repeated. In the old days, another one was micromanagement. A big one that's still in there was just 2 weeks ago. Is my ratio of positive to negative feedback is not right, that I'll give too much negative feedback as relative to the positive. And when you think about refilling cups, I'm excessively relentless. And I don't mean that in a good way. And so the two big ones in there today still are the relentlessness that can just be draining for people and the ratio of positive to negative feedback. Sure.
Hi, thanks for coming. When you entered DaVita, you found a company where morale was very low and people were feeling frustrated and scared of the situation. How did you get them to believe in this new culture and buying into all these changes that you wanted to execute?
Yeah, it was hard. So the company, if a single bank had asked for a single dollar, we would have had to close our doors. We were then 6 weeks of missing payroll on, at that point, 10,000 people investigated by the SEC, sued by shareholders, no COO, no CFO, no CIO, no VP of HR. They'd all either been fired because of the implosion or quit. We couldn't track our financial outcomes. We couldn't track our clinical outcomes. People were pretty pissed off. And in a way, what I realized is that a crisis is an opportunity for a leader. The metaphor I use is why do they pay so much money for Super Bowl commercial time? Stunningly, whatever it is, $3 million for a minute, the most in the world. It's really simple. They do it for the self-evident reason that everybody's watching and everybody's listening. And for a leader in a bad spot, it's like that. The bad news is you're in a bad spot. The good news is everybody is watching and listening. So if you can figure out with clarity what messages you're trying to convey, what do you really believe in, people are going to pick up on it 100 times faster than they would otherwise because of that differential intensity and the fact that you're doing it when times are bad. So one was we started talking about the core values and developing our own right away. And this was more intense than you might guess because my first meeting was in a group about half this size and said, okay, we started to spend a lot of time talking about core values and a vision for the future. Well, 2/3 of the room thought that was a really dumb idea. I said, first of all, we don't trust you. You're new and you get that Bain stuff, and the last company you ran got taken over, so you're probably just here to fix this and flip this, take a bunch of money out and leave. And even if you're sincere, you're kind of dumb. We can't barely meet payroll. Let's not start talking about core values. So 1/3 of the room was literally insulted that I would be demeaning them by thinking that they'd fall for such a little bit of rhetorical flourish. 1/3 said, okay, that's kind of the fad of the month or the quarter. And maybe 1/3 were interested. One of the guys who was most skeptical is now one of our SVPs right over there. And so we started talking about it, recognizing, and one of the things I say is that leaders speak their dreams, because if you don't, you probably won't ever pursue them. And the metaphor I use is if there are 8 of us together here and we're near the mountains, if I'm thinking I'd like to climb the mountain but I'm afraid I won't make it, I'll just say I'm going to go for a hike. And I get halfway up the mountain, I'm cold, I'm tired, I'm hungry. I say, phew, am I glad I didn't tell him I was going to the top, because I'll go back down and say I had a great hike. If I told him I was going to climb the mountain, hold all the other facts constant, halfway up, cold, tired, hungry, you're 10 times more likely to go to the top, only because you told people you would. Human behaviors are like that. If you say out loud to people, particularly a bunch of these people here are skeptical, and I say I'd really like to have a special place, where thousands of our people across all these small dialysis centers that don't even have their own phone extension or email address because they're hands-on blue-collar caregivers, that we want them to feel differently about their company, feel an unusual level of emotional trust and mutual social commitment without sacrificing any performance. And knowing that a whole bunch of people in that group are going to go, that's probably bullshit. But by my saying it out loud, despite knowing that a bunch of them don't believe it, I know I'm going to work harder the next day to make the decisions on the margin to make it come true. And so every 8 weeks, I get on a call with a couple thousand people and literally said out loud the following question: what is the incremental evidence that we are serious and competent about our mission and values? Forgetting all the other business stuff about the turnaround. Because that's the question people are asking. And if I hadn't known I had to ask and answer that damn question out loud every 8 weeks, a whole bunch of times when I would have gone home at 10 o'clock at night, instead of spending an extra hour thinking about what could we do on top of everything else to try to move the ball forward and be a community first. So a bunch of little examples and metaphors, but I talked about it out loud. There were times, one night, it was a group, again, about half the size. I went up to my room and cried after I talked, because I knew so many people in the audience thought I was either saying things that were naive or foolish or insincere. But we talked about it. And then what you find is that some people cross the bridge in our parlance, and they'll come up and say, KT, I'm there. I want to be a co-owner of that vision. And then it starts to spread. And that's when it gets to the point where you let other people speak. Because in the end, it doesn't matter what I believe or what I think. It only matters what the people think. So talking about it out loud, talking about it and forcing ourselves to come up with specific real-world examples of decisions or actions that reflected a differential emphasis on our mission and values for thousands of people and in small groups, and then starting to let other people speak. Because in the end, the people decide what kind of place it's going to be. and they're the only ones that can make it the way they want it to be. It's our job to facilitate the conversation and get out of the way. Thank you. Sir.
What was the culture and your leadership style like at Vivra, and how did that experience impact you and decisions you made when you moved to DaVita?
Yeah. Well, I got very lucky. The bosses I had at Bain, and then the Vivra environment, I was regarded as a very good team builder at Bain and at Vivra. But it was very different because at that point, although I didn't know it yet, the team building was a means, and a better Kent career, higher stock price, higher net worth was the end. And it wasn't anything insincere about the team. I mean, these were legitimately happy teams, but it was a much more sort of philosophically, spiritually superficial thing. It was a team created for a business goal, and everybody liked each other. Nothing wrong with it. It was quite fun. And if we were a football team, we would have won a bunch of football games. But we weren't dramatically affecting each other's lives or anything broader than our business purpose. We were just advancing our careers in a reasonably team-oriented way. And for me, the decision to go to DaVita was a very tortuous family decision, very tough, whether or not I should do it. And so for the first time in my life, I had to give serious life thought to what job I should take and why. Because there was a very strong line of thought that I should take 6 months off and go into the not-for-profit world, which was the plan. And so I did really stare at, did I want to do this for ego reasons, to prove I could be CEO and turn around a bigger company, make some more money, or did I want to do it because I could do more good for the world? And the answer was not obvious. I mean, it's not one of those things where it's 100, 0, 0, 100. So we went through a hellacious month as a couple thinking about it. And so I entered into the job with a lot more purpose. And what I realized X months in is that the means and ends had switched without me realizing it. That at DaVita, the profit has been the means. And the community has been the end, which is the opposite of what was before. And it turns out there's a very big overlap in what you do in terms of team building activities, stuff like that, but the texture of it is radically different. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Once you set the culture in DaVita, how do you prevent people from being drained out so that they either leave or that culture just becomes that knowledge and it is not longer practiced in your company?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. We might still have the slide. We took this very seriously. So if you're going to roll out a product, roll out a new strategy, you do analysis, you have a plan, you have milestones, you have metrics, you talk about it. So both kind of the intangible elements of a strategy of increasing innovation or driving international growth or whatever, and the tangible, they're all very rigorous. We said what we want to do across hundreds of small locations with people we can never even get in the same room with because they work different shifts and all the rest, different days, is we have to have a plan. So we had a very rigorous plan that included a focus on language. If we don't get the language right, where certain words have credibility and mean certain things, we're toast. I mean, it's no different than trying to create a jingle for a commercial. I mean, no product brand is legitimate unless it's sustainably authentic. It's similarly for a cultural brand within an entity. So there's nothing wrong with talking about marketing it and thinking about language as long as it's authentic. And if we didn't do that and develop our own sayings like one for all and all for one, we were dead. With thousands of people who've never gone to college, barely finished high school, that we're never going to get to talk to live, if we didn't come up with a language and then imbue that language with credibility, we'd be dead. So first of all, we thought about language, traditions, rituals. You think about any society, any tribe, any village, they have traditions, they have rituals, they have language, because it's essential to passing along the culture and the norms. But companies don't do it because they don't think of themselves as communities. But there's nothing sort of stunning about it. It's self-evident when you think about communities, and then people turn their brain off when they think about companies. So we did the language and the rituals and the traditions. Second, we put our money where our mouth is, and we do things like every single teammate across the country, every single citizen in the DaVita Village is invited to a 2-day academy. For many of our teammates, they've never been on a plane. They've never checked into a hotel with a credit card. Right? They come 2 days, no applied training. It's about our mission, our values, our history. They get presented to and talked to by some of the senior person in the company. We put now over 30,000 people through this. It's actually getting closer to 40. So number two is we invested so that it becomes part of the DNA. And then third, we have a whole bunch of those traditions and rituals are automatically set up to reinforce. You think, why do societies have 4th of July, Memorial Day, Labor's Day, Christmas, Rosh Hashanah, whatever. They all do that to force people to step back and think about their lives and their society and their aspirations and their kids and their family and their tribe. It's a very natural thing. A bunch of you are a part of communities or tribes that do that, geographic or cultural or religious. So we do the same thing. And so things like those core value words, hundreds of those happen automatically across our village every quarter, which is just like having a 4th of July parade, only it's in a dialysis clinic where you're honoring some nurse for being a core value award winner of team. So we did the language, and we do the reinforcing rituals and traditions in a very recurring, systematic way on top of the ad hoc events. And then we put a lot of money in it. And so our DaVita University classes have a highly unusual mix of stuff around self-reflection, introspection, life purpose. And very unusual. That's our gift to thousands and thousands of people, whether they stay or go. But what that does mean is for those who stay, the DNA DaVita is very strong. So it's, at this point, it's locked and loaded. You could take out a whole bunch of executives, but the corpus has it in their DNA. Thank you.
Thanks for your time. My question is, in my own experience, I've struggled with managing performance with also the need to make sure that the team is feeling fulfilled. Can you talk about how you've, it doesn't sound like balance, but how you've kind of achieved both in your work with DaVita?
Yeah, we feel strongly that there is zero conflict between performance standards and creating a fulfilling environment. And so first of all, you have, but we create that clarity, because if you don't create that clarity up front, in particular with us, we got 2,500 managers distributed out the company. If we don't give them the words and the language to have that locked and loaded, it gets very difficult, because when they're talking to a patient care technician and going through the annual review and it's got the mission and values box, you can't let that get in the way of the technical performance. It's important, but it's got to be separate. Now, we also talk about the linkage, and that stronger mission and values performance affects how the whole team does. But we believe step number one is you have to have total clarity that they are independent. You can have a very strong performer from a technical point of view, business point of view, a person who closes a lot of sales, who's terrible on the mission and values stuff. And for us, that's unsustainable. They have to be reformed or go. Or you can have the opposite. Someone's great on mission and values, fulfillment, but weekend performance, they have to go too. Because in a community, you can't afford, unless you have enough productive citizens, you can't afford to take care of the homeless, and you can't afford to reinvest in the schools. So it's again, we try to make decisions with that metaphor, and just as a community doesn't want someone who's really wealthy but doesn't care and doesn't give any money to the parks and is a jerk and takes advantage of other people in different ways. You can't, that really destroys the health of the village there. Similarly, having people who don't contribute and don't show up for work doesn't make for a sustainable village. So we use the metaphor, we're very clear intellectually up front, and then you recognize that there's always going to be some noise out there, and that's appropriate, because the fact is, if you get someone who's really strong on mission and values, you are willing to cut a little slack on the performance side, and vice versa. So that's what we go for. Strong intellectual clarity, use of the village metaphor, and so it's common sense. So everybody kind of goes, yeah, there's a little tension in the middle, but they're separate. Thank you.
On a couple of occasions, you alluded to Buddhist philosophies, and I was wondering, to what extent does faith permeate into your professional life, to the persona that you project to the company, and your leadership philosophy?
Yeah, I never talk about faith at work, because we have an incredibly diverse group of folks, and so I'm horrified that I can't go there without somehow creating noise, sort of philosophical noise. What we do talk about is the spiritual aspect of life, separate from the physical, emotional, and mental. And we do put that aside, and then that means very different things to very different people. But so far, no one wants that to be parsed through by faith. And we don't ever refer to anything out of this world. We just say that for many of us, there's a spiritual element to life, or there could be. And without putting any further label on it, that seems to work.
If I could just add, because the subject matter that you deal with, your employees must have to contemplate those issues. You know, if you have people on dialysis that have a fairly substantial mortality. Does the company counsel its employees on how to manage those sort of issues, or is that left up to the individual?
Do we counsel the individual caregivers about how to interact with their patients?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, we do a pretty mediocre job at that. Maybe mediocre is nice. We probably do an average job in it compared to our industry, and that's lousy. I would say that's probably the honest answer. We've just gotten good the last few years. One thing, you start running things that are larger, more complicated, you get to be embarrassed at what you realize about your own organization. So about 4 years ago, after I'd already been there 8 years, we realized we do a terrible job of managing the death experience. And 15% of our patients die every year. That's significantly lower than if you're in a non-DaVita center, where it's more about 18. So we're really good. But 15%'s a lot. And while we had good procedures around it, we did not act like a community when it came to the dying thing, both for our own teammates and for the families. And so we established a Circle of Life program where we now do a bunch of things that both our teammates and our families are finding hugely beneficial to help them in their journey towards death and dealing with it right after. And if you're in a clinic, it can be tough. You're 15%. It means you're going to have a number of people dying every single year. And of course, for the family, it's less often, but even more traumatic. So that's the one area where we're now good, proud. But in the rest of it, actually, Lindsay, Pat, can you put that down? Because this is one of these things where, as dumb as it's going to sound, we haven't really faced up to that reality that outside of that, we're still crappy. So thank you.
Hi. So one of the things that a lot of us talk about really enjoying as part of our GSB experience is that it has increased our propensity to kind of look to others to achieve things that we're interested in achieving. To that end, I'm really curious to know about who some of the most impactful thought partners and mentors were for you as you kind of went through your business career.
Yeah. Well, first, two were pre-business. I had two high school teachers, Robert Orth and John Marita, both math teachers, who were just stunningly humble, hardworking, virtuous citizens. And I was involved in student council in that, and they were incredibly giving in how they mentored me. And I realize now how they built within me a reservoir of sort of citizenship orientation and aspirational stuff that then almost got killed by subsequent stages of my career. But fortunately, it was substantial enough that I could tap back into the aquifer much later. And then for me, I had two leaders at Bain, Tom Tierney and John Donahoe. Donahoe speaks here, was some regularly the CEO of eBay that I worked for Tierney, and Donahoe worked for me. And then I got out of his way so he could take over the firm rather than push me aside. They were both very good, very much better than me at being well-behaved every day. I was much more erratic. I'd build a great team, and then I'd brutalize people the next month. And, I was going like this, and they were much more steady state, and I really marveled at that and got to learn a lot. And then I had one client in my Bain days, a guy named Dick Fontaine, who I just latched onto, and he's been sort of a shaman for me ever since. Was just an elderly gentleman, very wise, who asked me very important questions and wouldn't let me get away with superficial answers, and still does that to this day. So those five people, if I go outside, the people like my wife, are the ones that gave me gifts that I'll always be grateful for. Because without those five, again, going outside the family, I would have done a lot more damage than I have.
Hi, thank you. You spent a number of years in consulting and then have had a long career in industry. And so I'm wondering, as you look back on some of the biggest lessons you've learned over the course of your career, do you think that being in a consulting role prepared you for the biggest challenges that you were then going to face? Or do you think it wasn't until you were sort of on the ground actually dealing with these issues that you were able to sort of figure out what the right way of dealing with an issue, either from an operational side or from a leadership perspective?
Yeah. So first of all, if someone says you spend a lot of years in consulting, and then you've had a long career in industry, they're basically saying you're really old. They need a long this and long that. But separate from this length thing, I think for a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about, consulting is not good. Although some of the firms are wonderful, and I loved my time at Bain. I absolutely loved it, and as I told you, 2 of my seminal mentors were from there. But it's just not the same. It's just not the same as the kind of accountability you have for human beings in a different type of organization. Both the type of people in there and their incredible career mobility that they have and the ambitions they have and all that, and the dynamic is very different. They don't want the gift that you can provide people who make $14 an hour and are never going to retire early. So part of it's a need thing, and then part of it's just the nature of the business. So having said that, if you're sensitive to this, so when I was there, I wanted to work on implementation cases. I wanted to work for the clients I thought were the best leaders. And so in that sense, it was great because I got to be exposed to it. It was like going to business school. I was able to, given I wanted it, I got exposed to lots of people from whom I learned a huge amount. But it was because of my career path at that point, as opposed to something that would be available to everyone. It could be if they was pursued. And having said that, I want to go back. For me, so the question as to a lot of this kind of leadership philosophy stuff, that's the answer. As to whether or not my business career is better off because I did it, I think the answer is an unambiguous yes. That there's very crudely stated, there's sort of 2 groups of people, which of course is always wrong. There's people who are really smart and going to not be so good at managing, getting stuff done, managing organizations, relating to people. And for them, if they go into consulting first, they're just going to get better at their strengths. They're going to get better at batting right-handed, and they're never going to learn how to bat left-handed because after 4 years, it'd be a nightmare for them to shift because they were already remedial in that area, and now they're triply remedial. And so what I always said is if you think you want to run something, for profit, not for profit, if you're really incredibly smart analytics, then don't go to Bain & McKinsey first. Go work on those weaknesses and learn how to run stuff, because you can always fall back. You're still going to be smart in 4 years. You're still going to be analytical. And you can't miss that growth opportunity for working on your weaknesses, because you need to have some of all of that if you want to be a good general manager, CEO. Similarly, if you're a good team builder and manager, you're sort of task-oriented stuff like project stuff, that's your sweet spot. But God, you sort of marvel at how some other people can do a case in half the time that you do, and they get every important point, and you only got 2/3. Then I say, get your butt into consulting, because then you work on that. And so I think it's very much a situation, person-specific answer. And for me, I needed to be more strategically aggressive in how I thought. I needed to be more conceptual. I needed to do better at coming up with paradigms that were collectively exhaustive and mutually exclusive. So for me, it was a gift. And for me to shift into management was like, okay, I was born to raise that, to play that sport. A lot to learn, but that just fits with my natural athletic orientation.
Really helpful, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much.